and speaking to us tonight. I think we can sort of understand the support we've had for this campaign from the start from Caroline Lucas MP, because a couple of days ago there was a radio interview given by one of our education guys at 7 in the morning, which wasn't the easiest thing to do after no sleep, and also from an interviewer who wasn't really playing ball with what we were doing. I was a bit distressed, and about an hour later I turned on the radio again and heard Caroline Lucas defending us, having not had to ask her to, clearly called into the radio station to explain why she agreed what we were doing. Everyone, Caroline Lucas MP.
Always like that, that's amazing. But I am here simply to send you support and solidarity from the Green Party. My colleague Philip McCafferty, who's the Deputy Leader of the Council, is with me too and will say a few words in a moment. But absolutely the Green Party is behind you here. And the reason we're behind you is manyfold. But just to start with the whole issue of the process that you've been going through right now. It just strikes me as very odd that the first time that the staff affected and the unions and probably the students actually knew about the university's plans were when the contracts were advertised in the European Journal, that is where you advertise things that you want to outsource. Now that seems a pretty odd way to me of involving students and staff and the unions at the beginning. The very first thing they find out is when the jobs are already being advertised elsewhere. So, I went back and had a look at the Memorandum of Understanding that exists between the students and the university. Section 3.8 says, as you probably know better than I do, that the university will ensure that the union is fully engaged in the development, implementation and monitoring of university plans and policies. Well, that's a pretty strange way of involving the union being fully engaged in the development of plans when the first thing they hear about them is when they're already produced. And that sort of, that dilemma, if you like, that contradiction has been the centre of many, many letters that have gone backwards and forwards between myself and originally Michael Farthing, but he didn't reply to my letters, so then John Duffy did reply to my letters. And so we're in a conversation, but it's clear that people don't quite understand what consultation means, because in my mind you normally consult before you do something rather than after you've decided to do it. And this is the point that I'm trying to make. So there are major problems with the process, clearly. The fact that an in-house option was not even properly looked at, in spite of the fact that the staff and the unions went away very seriously and came back with a very thought-out, fully developed alternative in-house plan. So the process is wrong, but you won't be surprised to know that from the Green Party I think that the whole idea of the outsourcing and the privatisation is also wrong. But basically, we don't need yet more dogma that tells us that private is good and public is bad. And it was interesting, on that same radio interview that you were just hearing about, the interviewer was asking John Duffy, who was on the radio before me, why are you doing this? What's the motivation? And he said, well, we've already outsourced quite a lot of other things, so it seems like a good idea. That didn't seem like a very rigorous response as far as I was concerned. And it is, that's why I come back to this word dogma, ideology. It's part of this much wider process of what's happening to higher education, and indeed to so many parts of our economy generally. The idea is, I say again, public bad, private good. And I think that's something that we absolutely have to challenge. And I think one of the things that makes me so inspired by what you're doing here is that you are really showing that people are in it together, to use a badly phrased thing from George Osborne, and it certainly doesn't mean it when he says it, but it does mean it when you say it, because what you're saying is that you are here in solidarity with the staff affected, and that I think is so inspiring, because everything this government is doing is trying to divide people. Its whole cuts and austerity programme is based on trying to divide people, communities against one another, able-bodied people against disabled people, people who have private pensions against those with public pensions. It's all about dividing. And I think the real threat that you pose, actually, is that you won't be divided, that you're there with the staff, with the unions, and you're there in solidarity with them, and we're here in solidarity with that, and that, I think, is quite a powerful idea. I think it's quite a powerful idea to challenge the idea that, a university shouldn't just be like a supermarket where you go along and you pick something off the shelf for a certain price, and that will somehow guarantee you a job, which we kind of know doesn't exist, but we'll overlook that. The idea that university might just be about developing inquiring minds, challenging minds that are willing to stand up to authority, that's probably quite a threatening idea, but that's what I think of education. And so the way in which we're seeing government and indeed many universities colluding with it to this greater privatisation of education, the whole idea of the public realm being something that you never really hear about anymore, is simply wrong. And the way in which, you know, you'll know again better than I do, the terrible trebling of tuition fees. Again, the Green Party has always said that we are not in favour of trebling tuition fees. We don't even actually think there should be tuition fees. And one of the things we say is... is the whole of the proposals from the UCU union that's talked about a business education tax, and basically that would be an alternative whereby you tax just the 4% largest companies in Britain, and you do that by raising corporation tax just to the G7 average. So no one's talking about doing anything wild with corporation tax, just stop using it as being the lowest common denominator to try to get companies to come here, but actually put it around the G7 average. And if you did that, if it was at the G7 average, we'd still have a lower corporation tax than Japan or France or the US, but if you did that, you'd have enough money to not have to pay tuition fees at all. Now that to me at least seems something that should be debated in, and something that I have said over and over again in Parliament, to little effect unfortunately, but I continue saying it because I believe it's right. And I think it's right as well to be able to underline, if I could just say how important I think the arts are as well. It's a bit of special pleading. But the arts and humanities are having their cuts, their funding completely slashed. I know lots of the learning budgets are being cut, but arts and humanities are absolutely being slashed. And I declare an interest, having done a PhD in English literature, so 16th century romance, okay? So it's not immediately... It's not immediately obvious where that's leading one to, but it has led me to some interesting places. But you know, this whole fetish, is there a word, fetishization? I'm not sure, but that whole fetishizing of the sciences. I know sciences are important, of course sciences are important. But you know, there was a quote here about medical science can make us live until we're 90, but if you haven't got the arts and humanities, why would you want to live until you're 90? I will leave you simply by saying that all power to your elbow. I think what you're doing here is really inspiring, and you know that by seeing just a huge list that gets bigger every time I click on it in terms of the supporters that you've got, not just around the country but around the world. So I think that's incredibly inspiring. We're here in solidarity, and all the very best. Thank you.